morning, y'all.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen to get us started today. Can everybody see my screen okay? Cool. All right, so today we'll be reviewing MVC a little bit and looking at MVC concepts in practice. And I thought we would warm up by just talking about the logic responsibilities and how they're divided in MVC and what advantages this convention has and why it's useful in Rails. So let's start. I'll take a couple of volunteers to talk about each of these in a second here. So yeah, could I get a volunteer to, or a couple to give some reason or give some responsibilities of the model in MVC? What kind of logic is handled there? What's his job? What's the model's job? And what SRP considerations do we want to keep in mind? Anybody want to raise their hand and go for it? What does the model do in MVC? Angel?
I can give it a shot. So the model handles active record stuff and SQL stuff, so like all the data. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe we could put that under a bullet point and say data logic, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense to me. Does anybody have something to add to that? I think I saw another hand go up. Okay. Thank you, Angel. Does anybody want to take a stab at the view? What kind of logic does our view typically handle, or what do we want to keep there? Jenny?
It'll handle the HTML and what we want to display to the user.
Totally. So HTML, maybe CSS with that, and we could probably categorize that as like view logic or display logic. Maybe formatting, right? Great. Thank you. Who would like to talk a little bit, or unless anybody has anything to add to the model or the view, we can talk about the controller. What kind of, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, the controller is kind of like the middleman between both of them. So it's not really doing much logic, but it's talking to the model to get objects, and then it's sharing the instance variables with the view.
Yeah, great. So I think that's a great way of describing it. The middleman is kind of communicating between the model and the view, since those typically aren't talking to each other directly. Jordan?
I just wanted to share that I like to think of the controller as James Brown, like kind of like Take Me to the Bridge. So I want to share that.
Awesome. I will remember that for sure. What is it? Is it Take Me to the Bridge?
Yeah, Take Me to the Bridge.
Make sure I got the phrase right. Cool. So I think that's awesome. And these are both probably good ways of thinking of the controller being like a go-between or a traffic director. Could probably handle a little bit of decision-making and business logic in the controller as well, right? Like this route should go to this place for this purpose. I think I'll put those two on the same top level, like traffic director / some business logic.
Oh, and just a heads up real quick, Jameson, I think it's James Brown, Take Me to the Bridge.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Oh my gosh, can't type today. Okay, I think that looks right. This is great. Does anybody have anything to add about model, view, controller? Any other like considerations for what those responsibilities should be? Oh, Ben, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
All good. I was just gonna maybe add to the model that there's where we like define the behavior for those specific classes.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with that. That's great. Defines behavior for specific classes. Awesome. Yeah, this all looks right to me. Good warm up, good review. And as another part of that, what are like the advantages of MVC? Why do we use it? Why do we think it's a part of Rails? Yeah, anybody? Go ahead, Brisa.
Would it be for like easy maintenance, like having different compartments, you can go ahead and fix it if
Right.
needed, or apply it to multiple views if you want to create more things?
That's awesome. I would almost say that's a couple of different points, right? Because we can have like reusability, ease of maintenance, and reuse. There we go. And it's just really organized, right? I'll put that here. Do you agree with that, Brisa? Does that kind of get to your point?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Any other reasons that people can think of or advantages to MVC? Jacob?
Is this like one of the falls into the category invention over configuration?
Yeah, I would say that in Rails, we come across that a lot, right? Convention over configuration, just being how decisions are made. And yeah, because if you would imagine, like, I guess we could have an application with all this logic with like the route logic and the formatting logic and the data logic all in one spot. But that sounds like a nightmare to maintain and update and all that kind of stuff. So this is just kind of like a common thread throughout Rails, and it definitely applies to MVC too. Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Jacob. Anybody else? I think I might also add that like when it's organized for this ease of maintenance and reusability, it's also organized for like readability. Typically, if you're going into a Rails project and you know nothing about it, you'll at least know that you should probably, if you're looking for a certain piece of data logic, a model is a good place to start looking, right? That's part of the advantage of convention over configuration. It's, yeah, it's just easier to communicate with other people that may not have the same context about a project that you do, et cetera. Cool. This is awesome. Thank you all. So when we're looking at MVC and trying to make sure that our code adheres to all those best practices, yeah, we have some practice today for that in the lesson plan. It's linked in the calendar. We're going to take about 5 minutes and just spend some time looking at these these code examples, one for each of the MVC. And we'll come back together in a few minutes and talk about the infractions here and how they could be improved to better adhere to SRP and just, yeah, all the best practices of models, views, and controllers. So yeah, as the lesson plan says, for each of the code snippets below, identify where we're breaking MVC logic conventions, and we'll talk as a class. And the context of this exercise is that we're working in an app that tracks comedians and Netflix specials. So this is a one-to-many relationship. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down so this is on the screen, but y'all can absolutely pull it up on your own screen and look at it that way. And we'll come back together to discuss this at 9:15. All right, we're a little shy of 9:15, but it seems like people probably had enough time to identify a few of these infractions. I'd love to hear from somebody I haven't heard from yet today about the models example and what you would suggest improving here. Doug?
On that first one for self.average age, the fact that we're returning a string tells me that that's more of a views thing, and that it should just be the average age round 2 and leave turning it into a string to the view.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the first thing I noticed as well. This is presentation logic or formatting logic and shouldn't be in a model. The average age is great to have here, right? Because that's data logic. It's not something we want to be calculating like on the front end, but actually doing the interpolation and adding in any other like relevant text. Yeah, absolutely a view job. I would even say it would be good and okay to use like a method like round in a view. That's lightweight enough and not very logic heavy and probably totally fine to have in a view instead of having here in the model. Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, I was just going to point out the infraction in the view if we were
Yeah.
ready to move to that place.
Absolutely.
It's the comic specials dot count. I would say that you could probably do that in a model and then just call on it inside the view.
Yeah, definitely. Out of curiosity, like how would you set up that method in the model? Just like how do you imagine that working?
I would probably make it a class method. And then yeah, you could just call it very similarly inside the views.
Cool. So yep, I agree. This shouldn't be done in the view. I think there are
Yeah.
probably like a couple ways to get around it, but that sounds good. And yeah, if you did, you could do it probably as a, let's see, trying to think through the different ways you could do it. You could do it as a class method, and then we can get to like class methods and views in a second, but that all sounds good. Thank you, Joe. Can we get somebody for, Angel, for the controller, or did you have a question?
I did have a question.
Go for it.
For the view, could it also be an instance method since you're calling it on comic, a specific comic?
Yeah, I think that's where my brain would have gone first too, to make this an instance method on the comic. Good question. Yeah, it totally could
Okay.
be an instance method. Andrew?
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. So, some of my like methods in the controller are starting to get pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So, being able to call like for this one, if you had like comic dots or like comics dot specials dot each or something, and you were like iterating over all the specials, like to do like some places in the project, we have to do that over a lot of pieces of information, then our controller starts getting super heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like just better to stick to kind of convention in that case and let the controller get heavy and let those methods kind of grow pretty big? Or sometimes I feel like it's cleaner to just keep that in the view and call that extra method on it, but I don't know what the correct way to go on that would be.
Right. Based off of what you're describing, what I might suggest is, so if we're looking at something like comic.specials.count, if you can set up that collection with maybe, yeah, it just depends upon the case, but if you could set that up with an instance method or a class method or something, and then call that method in the controller, like what's a good example? I don't know if average special runtime is the best example, but if you could move some of that logic to whatever model it is that you're accessing through those instance variables, and then set up like an additional variable in your controller to use in the view, I think that would be more conventional than calling extra methods from the view, because the view really ideally should have as few variables, but also like just as little logic as possible. I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of logic that probably has to go in the controller in a lot of situations. But if you could say, comic specials, something equals comic specials, and then iterate over those in the view, that would be better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I just, in mod 1, a lot of they focused on was like keeping our methods like below like a certain amount of lines, and my like controller, some of the lines in those methods are like really racking up. So I just wanted to make sure that that was like more acceptable than doing like kind of more logic in the view to kind of try to cut down.
Gotcha. Yeah. I would say let's share screens and go into it right now, but we are actually going to have a portion of this lesson dedicated to code sharing with each other. So I think like hold on to that thought maybe, and it would be a good thing to discuss with your breakout rooms in a little bit here. Angel?
Cool.
I think this is kind of along with Angel's question, and I can wait and discuss it in our breakout room.
Okay, sounds good, whichever. I think we still need to talk a little bit about controllers. So did anybody have it like something they wanted to point out here? Kyle?
It seems like the comedian dot average age, that seems like active record logic, and that should go in the model.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And I had a question, Jameson.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for new developers, like when we're getting into MVC stuff, what do you think are like the most common faux pas that like inexperienced developers do that maybe we should be looking out for?
That's a really good question, and I'll also open it to like Brian and Alex to share if they have anything that they've noticed. I think it can't, like what I've seen a lot, both in my habits when I was starting and like in other people, is that it's really easy to just put a lot of logic into the views, especially when it's like a really complicated view, you know, with lots of different moving parts of information. I'd say that's probably like the thing that I think is most tempting for people who are new to MVC that I've noticed, but that's just like my anecdotal experience. I don't know. Anybody have anything to add to that?
I would say that these examples in this lesson are good things that like these come from, we see students do these all the time, and we want to put them in front of you and say like, watch out for this because this is easy to do.
100%. Yeah, piggybacking off of that, like this, like doing not a lot of active record, but like putting active record logic in a controller is another one that I think is a pretty easy misstep or gotcha. Alex agrees. Thank you. Thank you both. Cool. Anybody have something to add for this example in the controller section? I feel like this one's a little bit trickier. Doug?
I feel like this one could be similarly to what you said before about the round 2 going in the view, because it's more of not computational, but more of how much do we want to see or how do we want to present it versus actually computing or controlling anything.
Yep, totally. I 100% agree. And then if you take that and you put this part in the view, and you have access to this instance method on comedian, you could get rid of this whole line in the controller, right? Because then I think, assuming that this is all working the way I think it is, you're in your view, you can access at comedian, you can call this method there if you need to, like, you know, that's a method that's doing logic in the model, and then you have presentation logic here. Kyle?
Is there like a general rule of thumb where like in the view we typically don't want to chain on more than like 1 or 2 methods onto our model or instance variable?
Yeah, probably. What I will say is, and I'm open to being like corrected, but in my experience, I think like these custom methods that you're writing on a model, like just calling one of these seems completely reasonable to me. But if you're calling like this and then calling a sort by or something like that, you know, if you're chaining to that degree, it probably warrants its own model method, if that makes sense. That's how I would approach it and suggest approaching it. Cool. I think this is probably a pretty good time for a POM. So we'll come back at 9:30 and then we'll go out into breakout rooms and we'll talk about the code share or the code review before we do that. So let's come back at 9:30. All right, welcome back, everybody. As you're coming back, just a reminder to please turn on your video if you can. Let me know when everybody's back. I think I'm going to share my screen again here real quick. Okay, so we're going to move on to the peer code review section. Since you all are working on a solo project right now, this is a great opportunity to collaborate a little bit and get some peer feedback on your code. And the goal today for the next 20 minutes or so will be to help each other identify places where there are MVC infractions similar to the ones that we just looked at together. We do recommend setting a timer and then not actually spending any time trying to refactor here in this class today. Just make a note to yourself or a comment in your code, maybe something like MVC with whatever comments the people in your group have to share, and that way you can come back to it and refactor later. There are a couple of bullet points here for additional guidance, and you can reference the lesson plan or the intro to MVC lesson for any other ideas for what to look for. But that's it. We'll go for 20 minutes and then come back in case there are any questions, et cetera. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm asking y'all to do? Cool. I'll open those breakout rooms now. Hey, Alexa. Guess she's not here. AFK.
She's taking a longer palm. How are you doing, Jameson?
Great. How are you, Alex?
So good. It's good to see you.
Likewise. I'm really happy that you're going to be in Mod 2 with us for the rest of the inning.
Yeah.
And congratulations. I saw you were on maternity leave, so so exciting.
Yeah. Oh, I'm still kind of tired too. This little baby is not sleeping, so.
I'm sorry. How old is the little one now?
He is a little over 2 months now. So. Yep.
It's a special time. I can only imagine how much sleep you lose, though.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like when you're going through it, it's not as bad as like looking back, you're like, geez, that was hard.
Yeah,
but
that
in
makes
the middle of it, it's like, you're doing it for a reason. So it doesn't feel as hard.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I was late coming back from the palm. I missed what the breakout rooms, what the task was.
They're doing a code review with each other. They're in like small groups to share code from their solo projects, and then give each other ideas on how to like fix any MVC infractions.
Nice.
Yeah, and I figured we'd come back at 9:50 in case anybody like had questions. So we'll
Okay.
see.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay, so what questions came up as you were reviewing each other's code, if anything? Ben?
Yeah, an interesting point that we brought up was there's a side to MVC that's like removing logic where it doesn't belong, you know, taking stuff out of the view where it should belong in a model. But then as well as that, it's like you don't want the, or maybe this is a question of like the sense of another MVC is like if you have a model that has one method that runs a bunch of other methods, then that seems more like a job for a controller of like telling the model what to do. So is there an aspect of like not so like you know putting out logic of where it doesn't belong, but also not putting it where it shouldn't be? Of like that's you know you're removing the necessity of having a controller if you're telling like if the model is telling itself what to do. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that probably depends upon the exact like situation and thing you're trying to accomplish. But do you have like an example that you could screen share and show maybe?
It wasn't like an exact example of like we were just wondering of going too far of refactoring where you know you have 3 or 4 instance methods on a model instance method that were just kind of chained, and we were thinking like if you were refactoring, maybe just kind of bringing all those methods into the model, and so you just have one method that you call in the controller that you know runs all those other methods. But then that seemed to me like it was removing the job of the controller. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I want to say no, that's not quite accurate because, but again, like it would probably depend. There might be things that you're describing that could make more sense in a controller, but my thought is you're always going to probably need a controller for something or the other, right? Because your route has to, like, if nothing else, you should have your controller for the route and that action matching up and rendering a view or handling redirects and that kind of thing. But if it gets to the point where you have extra actions or helper methods in your controller, I guess there could be scenarios where they might not really have much to do with the data logic of the model, in which case there could be a case argued for, well, this really has more to do with the condition of the query params or whatever the case may be. And it makes more sense as a helper method that I can call from another action in my controller. Does that answer your question a little bit? Sorry, it's hard for me to give you a cut and dry answer without an example. You know?
Yeah, it feels like a lot of this stuff is kind of on a case-by-case basis.
It really is. And then there's also the challenge of trying to decide when it's worth a refactor or when when it's, an okay amount of tech debt for the time being while you work on other functionality. So it is definitely case by case basis, but I tend to I would suggest leaning towards putting as much logic in the model as you can, especially data logic that has to do with, a particular class.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Sure. Angel?
Yeah, so I have oh gosh. I have nested if in my view and controller. Is that bad?
I would like, it's great to avoid nested conditionals wherever you can. Let's see, I think if I were approaching those refactors, I'm just looking at the time, I would love to look at it together, but for the sake of time, I might start by refactoring what's in the view and see if any of that decision-making logic can either go in the controller or in the model, and then maybe take a look. Like I would prioritize refactoring the view because the view shouldn't have as much logic as either the controller or the model. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome, no problem. I think I saw another hand go up. Were there any other questions? Don't want to.
I was going to ask you to take a look at something, but it's okay.
Yeah, so it's 9:55. We have another class in 5 minutes. What I will say is, like, if everybody could take a second to go ahead and fill out the survey that's linked in the calendar, and if you need to take a POM, this would be a great time to do that because I don't want to like have y'all back to back too much. But that being said, Joe, would you like to screen share and we'll just take a quick look?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
And just real quick, Jameson, we can start the next class at 10:05.
Appreciate that.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
This highlighted line. So I know that we just talked about potentially moving something like this out, but even getting into a conditional quite like this, like, is this something that I would want to move elsewhere? Like, at what point do if statements in your view become something that need to be moved? Or I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And do you mind just like widening the window on the left a little bit so I can see the whole line?
Not at all.
Thank you so much. Okay, so what I might suggest for something like this, and there are probably multiple ways to simplify or refactor this, is I might make an instance method on application to check these conditions, and then just check against that method in the view. So maybe I would call it something like, to handle all of this, let me annotate real quick. I would just maybe pull, I don't know if can you see me writing on the screen?
No.
Oh, never mind.
Oh, now I can.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. So all of this, I could see that living in an instance method on application called something like is in progress or something like that. And then you could call if at application dot is in progress. And that just, you don't have to think about that when you're looking at this view, right? Your brain doesn't have to think about, like, you just call it what it is, and then your model handles the actual logic behind it. And that's what I would do in this situation personally.
That makes total sense. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to help. Angel, since we have a couple minutes left and the next class is starting at 10:05, did you have something you want to share, or was that example helpful as well?
Yes, that was helpful.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
If anybody has like a specific question about anything else, I'm happy to spend the last 2 minutes of class looking at that. Jacob?
Oh, not really a specific thing,
Oh,
but
okay.
like with the project like this, would you recommend like pushing for functionality or like going back and hitting some of the refactors we might have noticed in this class?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because it's a short deadline, I know, and there are a lot of learning goals around, you know, MVC and project boards and all that stuff. And I would say that I wouldn't want anybody to sacrifice that experience and those learning goals just to get all the user stories working. I would suggest taking the approach of red-green refactor. So having a good, robust test suite for feature tests and also your models, and then getting it to a place where it's working, and then maybe going through like we did today and identifying areas for refactor and prioritizing or triaging from there. Is that helpful? Did that answer your question? Sweet, thank you. Okay, I think we'll call it here in that case. Any follow-up questions I'm happy to look at in Slack, but please remember to fill out the survey if you haven't, and we'll see you in a little bit for the next class. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jameson.